Welcome to the Reach the Stars podcast, a collection of conversations with cool people who do cool things. Brought to you by Papercraft Miracles. Each week, we'll bring you inspiring stories of persistence, passion, and purpose. With your host, Janna Willoughby-Lohr.
Hello, welcome everybody to the Reach the Stars podcast. I am your host, Janna Willoughby-Lohr, and my guest today, the best. Oh my God. So my guest today is Carlos Andrés Gómez. I'm trying with the accent. It's been a long time since I took Spanish class, but this dude, the amount of things that you have accomplished before turning 40 is amazing. Like, I'm not even going to read your bio because it's like 100 miles long. But, you know, being one of the top slam poets in the world for more than 1 year, like many years, performing all over the place. You have this amazing book that's been called Man Up that's been featured on like all the blogs in the blogosphere. And then your chapbook and your forthcoming book, which are just like repeatedly winning awards all over the place in the poetry scene. It's just amazing. So props on all that. So for anyone interested, go Google him. But
Thank you, Janna. It's great to see you. It's so nice to talk with you.
I know. I first met you as we were determining right before we pushed record, I believe in 2006 at the National Poetry Slam. And then I know you came here to Buffalo to perform as the feature at our Grand Slam finale in 2008 when we picked our team from then, which is when I got these old school books. If you have one of these, you're privileged. If you don't, you can't get one. I'm guessing you don't have a stockpile of those in your
I have not for many years, so they're very, very limited edition.
It makes me feel happy to know that I do have those. But obviously we met in Poetry Slam community, and I would just love to pick your brain a little bit about, for people who are currently trying to get into the Poetry Slam scene and like why you got into doing Poetry Slam in the first place and why you kind of stopped doing it.
That's a great question. I think the biggest reason I think I sort of stumbled into Poetry Slam, besides where I was forced to, write a poem to placate a teacher and try to get a grade, which I don't really count as me writing poetry at that point. Of course, I did that when I was forced to in school, but I really became a poet on August 8th, 1999. And that was the summer before my senior year of high school. And I went to the Blockbuster near my house in Providence, Rhode Island, where I lived. I drove over there, and there was one single copy of this independent film called Slam, starring Saul Williams and Sonia Sung. And I knew nothing about either of the people who starred in it. I didn't know anything about the film. The cover looked pretty compelling. I read the back of it, and I was like, "This sounds incredible." And I think an important kind of backdrop to this moment is, I learned to read very late. I was a very delayed reader and had a very complicated relationship with literacy. And so I was a very slow reader and very low reading comprehension scores. And I think it was really, really hip hop that I fell in love with in middle school that really taught me to fall in love with words and with writing. Mm-hmm. And in high school, I had a couple of close friends who were MCs, and they do like MC battles. And some friends who were B-boys and some friends who were B-girls and things like that. So I would go to battles, and I'd just be like on the side watching people just trade off bars, and I think just being around that so consistently, I used to go to MC battles all the time. I would never battle. I was not an MC. But I think hip hop was something that gave me permission to consider the word as something that I had permission to I don't know, I guess have some kind of connection to that could be that I could claim on my own, like of my own volition, and not because a teacher had told me I had to do something for an assignment or, whatever else. And so that's important. So with that as the kind of foundation, I went home, I watched Slam, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. Hearing Saul Williams and Sonia Son do poetry, and the other poets that were in there, some of whom I know now, but Lisa Jess Peterson, Taylor Molly's in there, and a bunch of other people. But I think it was the first time I'd encountered poetry where I felt like stylistically and aesthetically, and in terms of the narrative and the stories and the spirit of it, it was something that had enough room to include my story and my voice and things that I care deeply about. I think traditional white canon is not one where I felt resonance, and particularly in the way that it was taught to me in my public school education. But when I saw Slam, it opened something up. So after I saw Slam, I just started researching Saul Williams and Sonia Son, and I remember there was less about Sonia Son, and there was a lot of publicity that I'd seen about Saul that I think coincided with some other things. And I kept hearing about the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. So that fall, as a senior in 1999, I went to the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, and it was the most magical place I had ever seen in my life. I still had no idea what a slam was. I performed, I did some different things. The scores, the whole thing just seemed so bizarre to me. I mean, it was so incomprehensible to me at 17. And also I think it's hard for people you're in my age, this is not a strange concept, but for people who are like 22, it's hard for people to think, well, why didn't you just like Google it on your phone?
Yeah, there was none of that.
I mean, like we were in the era where like you Google something, you misspelled it, and like no results would come up. You know what I mean? That was like after this. You know what I mean? Like
hearing about the iPhone the first time in Austin in 2006.
2006, exactly.
Yeah, so somebody there, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was like the big, super tall, kind of nerdy tech dude, big giant beard.
Yes.
But he was like, "There's going to be a thing called the iPhone. It's coming out," and like. Could change the world. Like
you're like, all right.
Anyway,
but
totally watched that Slam movie that same summer, by the way, because we're the same age. I totally watched that Slam movie that same summer in 1999.
Yeah, and I mean, first of all, it's an incredible film for like a lot of different reasons. But basically, after I watched the film, I watched it that night. I think like 3 times in a row. And then I stayed up until the sun rose writing poems. I'd never written a poem on my own terms ever. And I stayed and I wrote for like, 6 hours straight. I mean, it was out of control. I stayed up the whole night. I wrote the next day. I kept writing. It was out of control. I didn't know where you read poems. I didn't know what he was doing. I didn't know what the thing was where he was reading. I was like, what is that? What is that thing? Like where people walk up and they read poems and people clap and snap. Like, what is that? And then to experience it in the Nuyorican. And so I think for me, because I had heard that Saul had done Slam as a concept, I think I heard more and more about it. And I was living in Providence, Rhode Island at the time. That was 1999. 2000, the year that I graduated high school, the National Poetry Slam was in Providence. Now, strangely enough, I actually wasn't in Providence for the National Poetry Slam. And now I can't remember what I went on a trip. I went somewhere. I don't know. I literally can't remember at this point, but I remember it like devastated me that I wasn't going to be there. But just hearing more and more about this concept of the slam and having already gone and performed at the Nuyorican, which I guess I did a slam, but I didn't realize it. Then I was like, oh, this is what this thing is. So the only reason I even participated in slam is I was like, Saul Williams did this. I want to go experience that thing that Saul Williams does. I don't give a fuck about slam. Yeah. I just want to experience that like sort of spiritual sacred phenomenon. Mm-hmm. And so that's how I got into it. And then, I went to college in 2000 in Philly. And I remember one of my best friends went to NYU. I had a bunch of friends who went to NYU, and I would take the Chinatown bus At the time, it was $5 one way and $7 round trip, cash only. And I would take the Chinatown bus up for the Wednesday night slam. And I'd finish my class. I'd take the bus up. I'd do the slam. And then I'd take the 1 a.m. bus back to Philly.
And get up and go to class on Thursday, of course, you know. Oh, yes. To be 20 years old again, right?
Yeah, to be 18. And so, yeah. And I remember open slam. This is fall, probably September of 2000. I go in and Felice Bell is there. And Felice was like a legend. I was like, she's on the website, like legitimate legend. She's like a dear friend of mine now. But at that time, I was like, she's like a legend. And I remember she saw me perform. Like Ainsley Burroughs was there. Simon Felice was there. 2 weeks later, Jive Poetic and Mo Brown had just moved to New York. Mo had just arrived. This was like, I of course, my chronology is all messed up. It was maybe it was a year later. I don't know. But I met Mo and Jive like right when they arrived in the city. I mean, like the moment, like within a week of when they arrived. Mm-hmm. And I remember I had a really high score, but it was like a score creep night. Like I had like a 29-4. But then like the last 6 poets all got 30s. And I was so crushed. And Felice came up to me and she was like, "You're pretty good." And I was like, "Thanks." And she was like, "Here's my card. Call me if you're here on a Friday night next time you're in New York City, and I'll put you on the Friday Night Slam." And I honestly thought that my biggest aspiration in life ever, the only aspiration I ever had with poetry, was to just step on the Friday night stage of the Nuyorican. That was my ultimate goal. I had no goals beyond that. And for someone to walk up, like Felice Bell was a legend to me. And she walked up and handed me her card and told me to call her. I could do a Friday Night Slam. I mean, it was to get up in front of 350 people packed on a Friday night and stand on that little 2x4 creaky, crappy stage under the spotlight. So that was it. I slammed, in Philly. I slammed in New York. I slammed in Providence. I slammed all over the place. But I think that the reason I continue to do slam for 10 years, from 2000 to 2010, was I can't think of a more. There was something about the premise of slam, and there are obviously like this is a double-edged sword, as we both know from being in slam for a while. There's a lot of really horrific, destructive dimensions to this as well. But there was something that allowed a kind of cohesion and a kind of camaraderie between people that was like nothing I've ever seen. I think in terms of like building chops, in terms of like figuring out with even these kind of like contrived, silly stakes, from doing slam, like no matter how absurd it is, like on a certain level, it's really hard not to, like your ego and your vanity, not to be like, oh gosh, I don't want to get like a 4, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Up there. And so I mean, I feel like that was a tremendous training that I had. I mean, I probably went to 2 to 3 poetry events a week for 10 years and was constantly doing new work and was constantly, having mentors who really challenged me. You know what I mean? I constantly being pulled aside by, Rachel McKibbins and Marty McConnell and Lynn Procope and Ty Freedom Ford and all these incredible writers who would, they would challenge you and they'd interrogate you and they'd question you and they'd ask for more from you and they support you and and so I think for me, being able to do that, I went to I guess I went to nationals 5 times. I think I can't even remember at this point. I think it was 5 or 6. But mostly all with New York except one year where I went with Providence. For me, nationals was always about the opportunity to bond and create and workshop with extremely brilliant people you admire.
Oh my God, the experience, the one time that I got to go, it was like, Can I just live here?
That was it. Like to me, I genuinely mean this. I never cared about what happened at nationals. Never. I genuinely, like to me, nationals was the time you got on the team in that celebration, and then all the time up to nationals, and then nationals was just like something cool you did. Because there was so much absurd stuff that could be in or out of your control. It's like, whatever. But to me, that was what nationals was about. 2010 was my last nationals after I like pretty much retired like 3 or 4 years before. 2006, I was like, I'm done. And then 2010, there were a couple of folks I really wanted to be on a team with that I hadn't been on a team with. I really wanted to be a team on with Adam Faulkner and with Gina Enver-Lee. And so thankfully it worked out where Adam and I, along with Rico Frederick, were on the same team. And that was just wanting to be on a team with a couple of folks that I hadn't had that experience, even though they were dear friends. So that's why I did that. The part that I sort of scooted past quickly, there was like a litany of like very toxic, traumatic, destructive dimensions to the scene. Mm-hmm. I think maybe this is my nature because I'm like a third culture kid who moved constantly, and I'm kind of always kind of a person everyone's cool with, but kind of always a little bit on the outside. I think I was always a little bit aloof from the scene. Like I was kind of like, a part of it, but not like of it. Do you know what I'm saying? If that makes sense?
Like scene adjacent, like.
Yeah. I was like scene adjacent. Like, I think people like, I hopefully generally had like love for me, and they knew me and they knew I had love for them. But like, I wasn't like hooking up or dating people in the scene. I wasn't like, you said what?
That was exactly how it was for me.
Let's be clear. No, absolutely no problem with that. I mean, as long as, it's consensual and, whatever. No judgment. I'm just saying for me, I was like, I had like social worlds beyond the scene where like everything was not contained within the scene in this way. And so like, there are people I cherish and I value and I admire and I love, but like there are other social realms that I operate in as well. And there was enough things I'd seen that were like toxic and destructive that made me sort of maintain that aloofness as a kind of boundary. Mm-hmm. And, after 2010, I mean, I was definitely like sort of like reading the tea leaves on like the implosion of the scene that probably should have happened a few years before it did. Mm-hmm. And it was just time. Like as a premise, I think poetry slam is great to kind of cut your teeth and kind of build chops, but you don't necessarily, I mean, for me, I didn't want to live there forever. And there were other things that I wanted to do that definitely couldn't be like, I think it would have been inhibiting for me to remain in the poetry slam scene for me. And so that's why I continue to cheer people on. I continue to appreciate it, but I stepped away. And also too, I mean, I want to say this too, like there's really something to be said too about the New Eurekan. They changed this rule a few years after I was in the 2003 team, and I was on the New Eurekan team, my first team. But the original rule with the New Eurekan was when you're on the team, you can never slam at the New Eurekan ever again. And I've never slammed there again. The last time I slammed at the New Eurekan was 2003. I was like in the finals, I was second by like 0.2 of a point, and then I made the team in a runoff. There are people who are like, okay, cool, I want to be Grand Slam champ, so I'm going to keep trying for 10 years. I'm like, to me, I was like, I really wanted to be on the team. That's it. And I was like, when the team opens up again, to me, that's a sacred thing. Like allow space. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? There's like, so I kind of, and I was on the Bar 13 team a bunch of times, and, I made the Urbana team and then went on the Bar 13 team. To me, I was like, I want to make space there's a lot of people like in the younger generation coming up. I want them to have this experience. And first of all, they're legitimately will probably beat me in the slam anyway. But if they didn't, I don't think I deserve to get a spot in their place. I want to let them grow and experience the scene. So that's why I kind of moved on from it. But like I said, like, yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people in the scene have said, I think poetry slam is in many ways reflective of a lot of things in the world, in the sense that it mirrors like many of the most beautiful possibilities of us, mm-hmm. and a lot of the most horrific realities that we don't want to reckon with. And that hasn't changed as far as I know. Yeah. I
think it also, I mean, pretty much the entire time that I was doing poetry slam, I started writing when I was like 5 years old. So, and I ended up writing poetry as I would see a poem inside of my head like it was an image.
Wow.
And I would draw the letters. Ooh. And I like drew this picture. I thought it was a picture, and I gave it to my mom, and I was like, hey, look at my picture. And she goes, this is the poem, and where did you get this? And I was like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? It's a poem. I drew this, that's what I saw in my head. And she's like, you saw all of these words in your head? And I was like, yeah. And like, I didn't know how to spell anything. I was like 5. So I started writing these poems as like the whole thing. And I was like, obviously these poems are coming from somewhere else, you know. My mom was a poet. She was an editor of a literary magazine my entire life, like a couple of magazines at a time. And so my house was like always full of like envelopes full of other people's shitty poetry, like piled up all over the floor in my house. I would like swim around in manuscripts.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
I went to like many, many, many poetry readings, and like she never had money for a babysitter. So like my brother and I were always at poetry readings in the back, like absorbing it, obviously.
Yeah, of course.
And so when I was like in 7th grade, and I used to get bullied like hard at school, like really bad. I had like glasses and braces, and I smelled like cigarette smoke because my mom was a chain smoker, and my pants were too short, and I was always trying to be cool and like making shit up to make people be my friend because I didn't think I was cool enough on my own. You know, it's like the story of so many kids in 7th grade. And my brother had just gone to high school, and before he went to high school, we were like, you know, thick as thieves, the two of us. And then I remember the summer before he went to high school, he was like, I'm about to like go to another school and kind of become a different person. And like, we can't be homies like we have been once I go to school. I think when I go to high school and you're still in grade school, like, you know, we're still be brother and sister, but like we can't hang out all the time because I won't be able to be cool if I'm hanging out with my dorky little sister all the time. You know what I mean?
Wow.
And so I was like crushed.
Like devastating.
It really was. Yeah. And I mean, I had a couple of friends, both of whom I'm still friends with now. And that was it. And both my friends were also dorks. But they were like two of the cooler dorks. So I was like still with the dorks. And I remember once I got a haircut that was like the most popular girl in the school. She was like beautiful and on the track team, and she was super cool, and she was funny and had all the best clothes and like knew how to do hair and whatever. And I was like, if I have hair like her, then I'll be cool too. So I ended up like cutting my hair in the same way that she had just cut her hair. But I have wavy hair, and like, I did not know at all that you had to like use a curling iron to like make the bob like flip under. This is like early 90s, you know? And so mine was like this. And like, it was like, man, if there was Pinterest, it would have been like #fail on this haircut. And so many people at school were just like teasing the shit out of me. And like, they were like, you cut your hair because Brenna had hair like that. Like it was so obvious. And I was like, oh, and you can't do anything about it because it's a haircut. You can't like make it go away. And I ended up writing all of these poems about just like not having many friends and people being mean to me and like losing the people that I loved. And I wrote this poem, and I showed it to my mom, and she was like, you gotta go read this, people. And I was like, you kidding me? Like, what? I have no friends. Like, where am I gonna go read this to people? Like, that's terrifying. It's like the scariest thing I've ever thought of is like reading this insanity from inside of my head that I've been like writing on this page to pretend I have a friend that won't judge me. And you want me to go like read this out in public? And she was like, oh, this poem is dynamite. You got to go read this. And I remember like a couple lines from it, but one of them is, it was like, and now the cleavers chopped into these brittle bones of love. And I mean, some part of me, it's like, oh, it's so emo, you know, but
I love it. I love the emo.
And so she was like, you got to go read this. And I'd been at readings, but I'd never done like an open mic. I didn't remember that like that was a thing. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, we're going to go. And she took me to this local art gallery that had this open mic. And I was wearing my like Umbro soccer shorts because I was a soccer nerd. And I just remember like holding my paper up in front of my face like this. And it's like, like shaking like crazy.
Yes. I love that.
There was no kids. It was all adults in the room. And I was like 12 years old. And she was like, go ahead and go read it. And I start reading the poem, and people are like super quiet. And I read the whole thing, and I get to the end, and the whole room starts like the people are standing up, they're like clapping and shit. And I was like, whoa, that's pretty cool. Like,
yeah, I should do this.
Okay, maybe I should keep doing this. And like, that totally sold me on like performing at any time, because like that feeling you get when like,
oh, it's indescribable.
That energy from everyone in the room is just like beaming at you, and they're like taking your energy and giving you all of theirs at once. And oh my God, like there is nothing better than that feeling.
There's nothing like that.
And so I ended up starting to do Poetry Slam because it's funny, my mom was always like, she's always pushing me to do that, like share whatever I have with anyone who will see it.
Yeah.
And I had started writing, like, I remember as a kid, like my brother was really into hip hop, and because he was my older brother and everything he did was super cool, I was into hip hop. And I had this, like a tape player, like a shitty, like metal boombox tape player with the speaker on it. It was like yay big with the antenna that went way up. And I had a tape of Vanilla Ice.
Yes.
Classic. I took like a thin Sharpie. I think I was like 8 years old, maybe 8 years old. And I colored the whole front of this boombox and like decorated it all in like Vanilla Ice. And I used to listen to Vanilla Ice like over and over and over again all day, because it was like my first experience. Like, oh my God, somebody that looks like me can make music like that. And I want to do that at like 8 years old. And I never ended up like getting really into it as a kid, like to write my own stuff, but I was always like memorizing like songs that had cadences like that. And listening to Vanilla Ice and It's the End of the World as We Know It by REM before they included the lyrics in the liner notes. And I would like listen to it over and over to like figure out what they were saying. And so I could memorize it and I could do that and like have that type of words flying out of your face. And so I started writing stuff like that towards the end of high school, but I had been writing like capital P poems, that's what I like to call it, you know, like it's like more about from your soul and not like about impressing people with your lyrical skills of how cool it sounds, you know? And so I started writing stuff. I was listening to a lot of Eminem and shit like that. Like themes from Tool and sounds from Eminem. And I started writing a bunch of these, which turned out to be slam poems. I didn't really know there were slam poems. Yeah. Until I like was, watching that movie, and I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing. I could do those. It's kind of like writing raps, but they're like self-contained and they're using a chorus. Like, so I could do that. And there was a poetry slam at this local theater here in Buffalo called the Ujima Theater. And my mom was like, you should go and read some of these poems at this poetry slam. It's a poetry competition. You should go do it. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I shouldn't go do that. And she was like, yeah, just go do it. Like, you know. And I remember telling her, like, I'm afraid to be up on that stage and to share stuff with people. Like, what if they hate it? What if they think it's stupid or whatever? And she just said to me, she's like, the only difference between nervousness and excitement is fear. And when you're up on a stage with a microphone, sharing something that means the world to you, like, what else is there but to be hella excited about that?
Wow, I love that.
And so now every time I get on a stage, like, that runs through my head. Like, I'm so excited to like let that out up there. So I go to this poetry slam. She drops me off outside. I walk in the door and there are 2 white people in the room, including me. And I mean, I'm glad that she made me go, because it was like eye-opening for me to like, for one of the first times in my life, to like be the minority in the room and to walk up to the front and still like, as I think I was like, I don't know, 18, sign up my name on there and go on the stage and like do these couple of poems that I had. And I knew enough to like save the really good one for the second round. I made it to the second round, so that was cool.
Nice.
And I ended up like, I think I got like 5th place in the whole thing. Yes. And one other white chick who performed, and she was like dead last out of all the people who scored on it. And I get off the stage at the end of it, once they had like awarded the people who were the winner. I don't even remember who the winners were, but they were fucking fantastic. And I was like, yo, I felt like I was in Wayne's World, like, I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. I'm scum. We suck, you know? And I get off the stage and I hear from somewhere in the audience, I hear, Willoughby, come here. And I'm like, what? It was my lunch lady from high school.
Whoa.
Who was in the audience, and it was her daughter who had won the slam.
Wow.
And she's like, girl, come over here. And I hear her, and she was like, girl, I like what you had to say.
Wow.
You should keep doing this. And I was like, okay, like I'm gonna keep doing this. And I got into slam from doing that. And I was going to Warren Wilson, which is like out in the middle of fucking nowhere, and I'd have a car. So like I could only do whatever slams were like on the campus at school. So I didn't do too many like big slams or anything between like 2000 and 2004. And when I came back to Buffalo in 2004, it was when Gabrielle was really just starting the slam at the Albright Knox. And I really got connected with her through a couple people who had like heard me perform. But I had started playing music when I was in college.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And like being the white chick rapper as MC Vendetta up on the stage with my DR202 drum machine and my microphone and talking shit about George W. Bush all day long and like tearing up the government and getting people active and saying the things that they were telling us to be afraid of at that point. And I was like big time into politics. And so Poetry Slam was like an awesome outlet for me to kind of have a space to do my capital P poems that weren't always like, I used to do like a mix of like, this is real me and this is like Vendetta, like my superhero, you know? And so I think because I had this like weird, not necessarily cohesive stage presence, I would go on the stage and I would like do my thing. And every single time I do a slam, somebody in the audience would come up to me and be like, damn, I can't believe you didn't win. Like, you got robbed. Like, your poems are awesome. What is up with this? Like, why do you never win? I'm like, because I don't do that. I don't do that slam thing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't perform for the audience. I perform for me. And so I think partly that was like, I was always torn between like, oh, I can't go to that slam because I'm doing this show or I got a full-time job and I can't travel across the country and whatever, you know? So I don't know, but slam definitely changed my life. I mean, there's so many amazing experiences and amazing people that I know now, like you, because like, you know, from doing Poetry Slam in the first place. And it's a beautiful community, but I ended up stopping doing slam mainly because I would get this feeling when I would go to the slam that while people were performing, that the other poets who were waiting to perform were like,
I know exactly what you're saying.
They're rehearsing their poems and they weren't present. And
there's a lot of really toxic dimensions to the whole premise. Definitely.
Yeah. And it ended up, I mean, I love that it makes
there's clickiness. There's all types of stuff that's very destructive. I think that was stuff that definitely solidified my permanent retirement and departure from slam.
Yes. Anyway, we could talk about slam all night, but I want to talk about some other things. So one thing I wanted to talk to you about was something that was in your book, and it was about becoming an activist as a kid, and like being in 8th grade and getting your letter published in the paper.
I letter to Eileen Gress, the superintendent of schools. Yep. Yeah. Calling her a racist. Yep.
Yeah. So I wanted to know about your thoughts on that and like how it affected you as an adult to like have power like that as a kid, to know that you could affect change even in small ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it was just the modeling of my, you know, my dad and my mom and my older sister. You know, I mean, you know, my older sister was always very active in the world. And then like, you know, as I got older, you know, she's worked for sexual and women's rights for more than 2 decades and done abortion rights stuff in places where like it put her life at risk, and, you know, worked in really like high intensity social political environments where the stakes were quite literally her life to, you know, advocate for human rights, maternal child health, things like that. But, you know, my dad has done different stuff related to human rights, and my mom has done stuff for indigenous rights, and she documents endangered languages and is a linguist. So, I mean, I think they're modeling, I think in many ways it made it, and also me moving a lot growing up, it made it impossible for me to not think of myself as accountable to the world that I live in, and to not think of myself as a global citizen. And I think, that solidified it for me when I was 14. I wrote a letter when they tried to cancel Martin Luther King Day to make up for snow days in my middle school in Darien, Connecticut. And then the letter like went viral for that era. It was printed in all the papers, and they reversed the decision in one day. I mean, the superintendent was, I'm sure, mortified that this 14-year-old called her a racist, and it was printed in every paper. Yeah, you know, it's like, I think, I knew that my voice was powerful. I knew that like my voice as the universe, I knew that a voice can be powerful long before I ever stepped up to a mic. And I think, I think just through the ways that my mom, my dad, and my older sister lived their lives, that was one piece of evidence. And then the further piece of evidence were, you know, my experiences protesting. I mean, I've been going to protest since I was a teenager, since I was 14, 15, and writing that letter and other organizing related stuff that I did as a teenager in high school and middle school. So, I mean, I think that, that definitely, that hopefully that brash, uncompromising kid is forever inflected in the person I am now.
Oh, it so is. It so is.
And never abandons the person that I have turned into, and I'm continuing to try to become into.
I just love the person that you are, Carlos. You're awesome.
You're very sweet, Janna.
So the end of all the podcasts, I ask everybody the same 5 questions.
Okay.
So I'm hoping it doesn't take longer than 8 minutes.
No, let's do it. Let's do it.
The first one, it's tell me about an experience that shaped who you are today. Like one of those like one moments where you're like, oh, everything is different because of that one thing.
Yeah. I mean, probably, I would say this kind of, I think, solidified my path that I've been on as an artist, as my sort of life calling. When I was, a couple months after I saw Slam, Martin Espada came to my high school in Providence, Rhode Island, and he read from his book, Imagine the Angels of Bread. And, I went up and bought a copy of, you know, his book, and he wrote Para Carlos, Poeta del Futuro, Martin Espada in the book, which, you know, means for Carlos, poet of the future. And he didn't know I was a poet. He didn't know I'd been writing poems quietly that I hadn't shown anyone, you know, since watching Slam. And I think that was definitely a transformative watershed moment in my journey. I don't know where I would be without Martin Espada that day and beyond.
That's awesome. Okay, number 2. When you feel defeated or overcome, what do you tell yourself to keep going?
One of the things I constantly tell myself is, you know, is just remind myself that I am enough, and that each of us is enough. And, you know, I mean, I think one thing that I think is just sort of very much at the heart of my work, my personal work, my artistic work, my life work, is I very much am constantly in confrontation with the fact that I'm like a deeply flawed work in progress. And I think that, you know, failing is a requirement to doing anything. And failing epically and spectacularly and very deeply vulnerably is a requirement for doing anything meaningful and transformative in your life. So I think I constantly remind myself that a constant encounter with failure is in fact the inherent blueprint to wherever I'm trying to go. And so I think whether I'm failing in terms of the person I'm hoping that I am, or what I hope to succeed, or what I hope to do today, tomorrow is a new day and I will have another shot. And so I try to remind myself, then there's 2 things, just failure is a gift and I'm enough.
Awesome. So number 3, it's funny. This like totally ties in. Tell me about a way that you overcame a failure or a mistake and what you learned from it.
We have, let me see, a failure or a mistake in the way I overcame it. I mean, I think one thing is, I think about learning to read late and having a really hard time in school. And I think overcoming that. I never struggled with school again as a concept, although I was forever been a slow reader and probably would still get really low reading comprehension scores if I took a standardized test right now. But I think it built tenacity and habits, and I had to develop other tools to work around the fact that I was a slow reader. I probably have some learning differences that haven't been diagnosed. All the challenges that I had with reading with school early on, I think it helped me. It forced me to develop tenacity and tools that if I breezed through, I don't think I would have been forced to have developed. And I think those tools have been sustaining and have served me well in the long term.
Awesome. I used to write all my letters upside down and backwards. So I totally get it.
Wow.
Yep. All right. So what is one trait or habit that's most responsible for keeping you on track?
Wow. One trait. I have a completely, you know what, related to what I said before, I have no fear of failure. I don't fear failing at all. I don't encounter a lot of people who say something similar. That may be true about other people, but I think that might be like my single most resilient gift is like I could fail, or I could have like the whole world disagree with me, or I could have the whole world tell me like my work is shit. And I'll be like, okay, they're wrong. And I think there's kind of that, I think that like I often say, like depending on the perspective you come from, like my career and my life has been like an overwhelming series of failures. Like I've probably had like a 0.03% success rate, but I just put myself out there so much that it appears like I succeed a lot, but I'm actually failing relentlessly. And so I think that's an actual gift, is just that tenacious, overachieving fearlessness that I move through the world with, is I could just keep failing. And I don't think that it appraises me as a failure if I fail. I think, okay, cool, let's try it again.
Yeah. You're like, well, okay, that didn't work. What next?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is not one of the questions, but I'm curious, like how many times did you send out your book before it got published?
I can't remember with my chapbook, but my full length that's being published this fall, it was rejected 33 times over 2.5 years.
Anyone who's listening, I want you to know that like,
yeah,
some of the best poets in the world have like an insane amount of people be like, nope, that's not the book for me. And then books come out and they're amazing. So
yeah, no, I mean, like, and 33, I'm saying like 26 or 27 of those were like, dear submitter, like, go fuck yourself. I'm trying to remember Justin Philip Reed, who won the National Book Award a couple years back. I mean, Justin Philip Reed, I think, was rejected either 8 times or 11 times with their book, and the book won the National Book Award. So I think we all need to like remind each other about that, and just keep it in perspective. I mean, 2018, I won a bunch of awards for different poems and got a lot of publications. I also got 104 rejections that year. 104. Yeah. So I think like, and I was actually aiming for triple digits. That was a goal I had. So I was really, I seriously was really grateful when I got that 100th rejection. I was actually really excited. So yeah, I think that's important for all of us to remind each other about as writers and artists.
Yeah. And one of the Heavy Hitters events that they did, I think it was Amber Flame. And I asked them, if you're going to try and submit a book or whatever. And she was like, you need to submit so often that you only track the yeses. Like, that's gold right there. I love it. Okay. Do. Number 5, what is the best piece of advice you've ever gotten? And what advice would you give to other people?
Wow. The best piece of advice I've ever gotten, man, that is, I'm going to give, this is both literal and figurative advice that I'm going to invoke and also give to people. So one of the most wise, brilliant, talented, generous, kind, transcendently gifted human beings I've ever known is a woman named Tamala Woodard. She married my partner and I. She directed and co-conceived my solo play Man Up, which was the play that inspired the memoir I would write years later. But the play I wrote with her and developed with her was in the spring of 2007. And we did it at a bunch of festivals in New York. I did it at the Edinburgh Fringe in Scotland. But the play was extremely challenging. I mean, for a lot of reasons. But it was 75 minutes, me by myself. Like, for folks who've ever done a solo theatrical work, I mean, it's all you. If you're having an off night, like, you just got to sit in front of a sold out house the rest of the show. There's no one to catch you or to help you out. It was an incredibly emotionally intense, vulnerable excavation of largely my relationship with my father, but also my other relationships. And it was extremely emotionally challenging. So it gets picked up I get flown to Scotland to do it for 35 consecutive nights at the Fringe in Edinburgh. And I mean, I can't express to you like how difficult that was for a lot of reasons. I mean, it rained 19 consecutive days, and I got the flu the 7th show and didn't miss a show, and did, I think, 5 or 6 shows in a row with the flu, very, very sick. And I remember Tamala said to me, because like I had these incredible nights where I had a long standing ovation. I have nights where I was just struggling and couldn't get into it. And she said, "You always have until the last word. You always have until the last word." And she's like, and every show is like that. She said, every play, every performance, every concert, people just want a moment. People just want a moment. So keep fighting to get there. If you're struggling with being present, if you're struggling to get in your body, if you're struggling to get back on the train that you're trying to just stay there. And I remember like having this one show where I couldn't catch up to it until the audience was out of it. I mean, it was a mess. And I remember the final moment of the play. It's this beautiful, beautiful moment where I take this breath, and then all the lights cut as my chest fills up with air. I was present in that one moment, and everyone in the house stood up and was like weeping and clapping. And I didn't earn that. You know what I mean? Like, but it was like that last moment. Mm-hmm. I fully landed and arrived in my body. And to me, that's kind of I don't know, in many ways, it's like an analogy for the lives we live. You know, like I don't know. I believe that we all have an obligation, and we all have a right to like become the people that we're meant to become. And I think that I think we all have a right to like heal and to be better. It doesn't absolve us of the terrible earlier versions of ourselves that we've been. Mm-hmm. But I think that those terrible versions should not prevent us from being the person we're meant to be right now. And so I think I remember that in every show, but also in life. And I pass that along to anyone who's tuning into the podcast.
Hopefully
you have until that last word.
We'll see. Well, that's my last official question. Do you have anything else you want to add, or?
No, I just want to say I'm grateful for you. I love your spirit. I've always admired you and think you're a sweetheart. And it was great just to chat with you and hang with you. Thank you for doing this.
I know. We'll just have to have like a Zoom Mad Lib hangout.
Yes. And on the other side, I got to get back out to Buffalo, and then we'll really hang.
I know. Once the world is not so fucking crazy.
I know.
Oh my God. I have one more quick question.
Yes.
What is the number one positive thing that has come about in your life because of the global pandemic?
The number one positive thing is I have spent every moment with my 2 kids, who are with me, but they're sleeping right now, since the shutdown. And, I lost a half a year's worth of gigs, but I gained, 4 months of every single present moment with my kids. And it's been a tremendous gift.
That's awesome. How old are your kids?
They're 2 and almost 5.
Same. My oldest just turned 5 and my youngest is 2.5.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah. Aw. can't believe we have kids. What the hell happened?
It's wild. It's wild to think about.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on the podcast and let me pick your brain and share it with everybody.
My pleasure. Great to see you. Keep in touch. We'll talk soon. Okay.
I definitely will. You all can find Carlos on his website at carloslive.com. And it will have the links to everything else. And you should go buy all of his books because they're amazing books. So,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night. Take care.
We'll talk soon.
Right.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
A single interaction has the power to change your life forever. This is a place for the stories of those moments. Stories of pursuing dreams, overcoming tragedy and failure, of coming back to life after so much of what feels like dying, of continuing on with only a vision as a map. This is the place where those moments live on. Come sit by the fire, look up at the stars, and be forever changed too.
Thank you for being with us on the Reach the Stars podcast. Our theme music is generously provided by Byrocratic. You can find him on bandcamp.com. Thank you to all of our current patrons, guests, and everyone else who helps make this dream a reality. We are so proud to be building this amazing community with all of you. If you love this podcast, please consider sharing with a friend, leaving a review on iTunes, and becoming a patron at www.patreon.com/reachthestars. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the videos of these conversations. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, do something cool and tell us about it.